Who is the most disturbing person you've ever met that still gives you chills? Story 1. I once went hiking with this guy, and he showed me a dead body. This started when I was at my childhood friend's apartment for what was supposed to be a fun little movie night. We hadn't hung out in a while and we were catching up. Her place was cozy, a little disorganized and full of girly decor. We were in our comfiest sweatpants about to watch princess movies. Her apartment wasn't the tidiest. Things were scattered around, but it was clean and authentic, which always made me feel at home. We decided to order pizza for dinner. She mentioned that Sherwood, someone I hadn't met yet, would bring the pizza. At first, I wasn't happy to hear that. I thought it meant she had invited other friends over, which wasn't what I had in mind. But Sherwood turned out to just be the delivery guy for the night. He wasn't joining us. When he arrived, there was this awkward air about him. He was clearly nervous, fumbling with the pizza boxes, avoiding eye contact. My friend introduced us quickly, and it was obvious from her overly thankful demeanor that Sherwood did more for her than just fetch dinner. After handing us the pizza, there was a moment of forced small talk. My friend was kind to him despite his awkwardness. He wasn't a good conversationalist and seemed out of place. Then Sherwood asked for my number. I felt pressured since our mutual friend was sitting there, so I gave it to him. We chatted for about 5 minutes before my friend gave him a cue to leave, saying something like, "Thanks so much for dropping this off." He got the hint. We both hugged him, and my friend said, "Drive safe," giving him another signal to go. When I asked my friend what that was about, she explained that Sherwood was basically her unpaid assistant. He did her grocery shopping, brought pizza, and ran other errands. I think Sherwood was just a lonely guy desperate for interaction, especially with women. We were both young and immature then, around 23, but we sensed something was seriously off about him, even if we couldn't pinpoint what it was. Sherwood later started a group chat with my friend and me, sending memes once in a while. It felt like he wanted to stay relevant without being intrusive, like he didn't want to give me a reason to block him. He also offered help with errands. At first I said no, but he asked every weekend. One day I made the mistake of accepting. I had found a great deal for a washing machine on Craigslist but didn't know how to pick it up or install it. When I mentioned it, Sherwood eagerly volunteered to take care of everything. He handled it perfectly, saving me a lot of hassle. I tried to pay him, but he refused. I insisted, and eventually he suggested I could repay him by going on a hike with him. I felt uneasy. It seemed too personal, almost like a date, but he framed it as just a friendly outing, a way to balance out the favor. I rationalized it as fair trade for the washing machine installation. The day of the hike, Sherwood chose a trail nearby. I had been there before, and it was beautiful. As we walked, he chatted about ordinary things like work, the weather, and hobbies. Everything seemed normal until he suggested we go off the main path to see something special. We reached a secluded spot, and there was a dead body. My heart pounded as Sherwood stood there calm and nonchalant. His casual demeanor made me even more uneasy. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a body, but revealing something darker about himself. The smell was strong, and the face was decomposing, but still recognizable. I didn't know how long it had been there. I quickly made up an excuse to head back to the main trail and urged Sherwood to follow. My mind raced. Was this some twisted way to intimidate me, to prove he wasn't harmless, or maybe to make himself unforgettable? I'll never know. On the way back, I was in full fight-or-flight mode, scanning for other hikers. When I saw someone else, I called out, not to expose Sherwood, but to ask for directions back to the parking lot. I insisted this person walk us there, pretending to be confused until he agreed. That gave me a sense of safety. At the parking lot, I called my friend, told her I was with Sherwood, and said we'd be at her place in 20 minutes. I also texted her everything right away so it would be on record. Back at her apartment, we thanked Sherwood and sent him away. Then I told her all the details and she was horrified, not just at the body, but at how casually Sherwood had acted. She admitted she'd always felt something was off, but never imagined anything this disturbing. We decided to cut him out of our lives. The plan was gradual, limiting interactions to group settings, reducing responses to texts, and never asking for help again. Sherwood kept offering errands, to which my friend politely replied that she was trying to be more independent. Eventually, when she started dating someone new, she introduced Sherwood to her boyfriend, and Sherwood never contacted her again. I called the police that same night, but it took over a month before we heard anything. A news report confirmed a body had been found in that area, and someone was arrested. Not Sherwood, but another man he followed on social media. I still don't know if Sherwood was involved. Story 2. A man was living in my basement for months. You hear stories about people unknowingly having someone squatting in their homes, but never think it will happen to you. It happened to me. About 10 years ago, I, a 31-year-old woman, was living alone on the second floor of a two-family house with my toddler. For the story to make sense, I need to explain the layout and some backstory. My brother's close friend lived on the first floor and had referred me to the landlord. We had private front entrances but shared a back entrance with a staircase that ran from the basement up to the second floor. I often left my back door unlocked because I had a habit of locking my keys inside, and my downstairs neighbor could let me in through the back. The downstairs neighbor had a friend who was struggling. He had a history of substance abuse but was supposedly clean at the time. He seemed relatively nice, and my neighbor let him stay on his couch for a while. But with a 4-year-old daughter, having someone permanently on the couch disrupted their daily life. Eventually, my neighbor told him he needed to leave. Since it was summer, the friend decided he would sleep on the covered porch, but we told him that was not acceptable. When we asked him to leave, we meant the property entirely. By then, it was also clear he was using again. His behavior had become erratic, and he made several unwanted advances toward me that left me very uncomfortable. He wasn't happy, but it wasn't our problem. Soon he stopped coming around, and we didn't see him again. A month or two later, I noticed things going missing. Jewelry, small amounts of money, lighters. I thought I had just misplaced them. The house was old with thin walls, and the back door was right next to the bathroom. It made a distinct noise when opened. One day while my car was at the mechanic, it probably looked like I wasn't home. I was in the shower when I heard the back door open. I froze, barely breathing. But after a few minutes, when nothing happened, I told myself it was in my head. I had always been a wimp about noises, ever since childhood. Weeks later, the landlord came by and went down to the basement. It was big, cluttered, and dark because he also stored things down there. He heard a strange noise, grabbed a baseball bat, and found the man in our basement. The man pushed him down, ran out of the house, and bolted down the street. We called the police, and they found him hiding in a trash can around the corner. Further investigation showed a basement window slightly propped open. In a back corner behind boxes was a nest of blankets with our missing items and drug paraphernalia. It looked like something out of a nightmare, like Creature's nest under the stairs at Grimmauld Place. He had also left behind his flip phone in the chaos, which contained many pictures of me sleeping. This man had been high, living in our basement, and regularly entering my apartment while I wasn't home, and even while I was asleep, for months. I still get chills thinking he could have done anything to me or my child, and I would never have seen it coming. The worst part is that the charges somehow got dropped. We were never consulted as victims and had no say, despite this not being his first offense. My state is notoriously soft on nonviolent criminals, regardless of whether the crimes are actually victimless. My local police department is also known for making deals in exchange for information, even from small-time dealers. We never got justice. Luckily, it didn't leave lasting damage to my mental health, just more of a, what on earth, I can't believe that really happened feeling. To this day, it feels like a fever dream. Story 3. 10 years ago, my ex and I went to the drive-ins on a Tuesday night. I only had Wednesdays off at the time, and Tuesday was perfect because it was $5 movie night. We watched Gone Girl, and the movie ended close to midnight, so it was late when we were leaving. I was driving, so we pulled out of the theater, and I got on the freeway to head home. I was in the right lane stuck behind a semi, so I put on my blinker to pass on the left. It was late, and besides a semi, I didn't see a single car in sight, so I merged. Not even a minute later, a white truck appeared behind me, flashing its brights and riding so close to my bumper that my first thought was, did I accidentally cut him off? But that didn't make sense since I had checked my mirrors and hadn't seen anyone at all. I passed the semi and moved back into the right lane, thinking if I had cut him off, he could honk, flip me off, and then move on. But no. As soon as there was space, he squeezed right between me and the semi, glued to my bumper again. My ex had fallen asleep, and I didn't want to wake him yet, thinking maybe I'd made some mistake, and this guy was just mad. But there were 3 empty lanes to the left where he could have passed me miles ago. Instead, he kept flashing his brights and tailing me. I switched lanes again, hoping he'd move on, but he followed every change I made. I stopped using my blinker, swerving lanes randomly, and he still stayed right behind me. At this point, I was terrified he was going to hit me, so I sped up to 90 miles per hour and he matched me. I was shaking when I nudged my ex and whispered, "Babe, I think we're being followed." He woke up, looked behind us, and immediately saw what I meant. My exit home was still miles away, and I begged him to call the police, but he just kept watching. Suddenly, I remembered another freeway exit coming up. I was in the second to right lane, and as soon as I saw it, I swerved hard, barely missing the concrete pillar as I darted onto the ramp. I glanced at the truck for just a second and saw the driver staring directly at us. My chest tightened, and I burst into tears. My ex saw him too, and his expression told me he was just as shaken. I pulled off at the first exit, found a brightly lit gas station, and stopped. I couldn't drive anymore, so we switched seats. Back at home, after I calmed down, we talked about what had happened. I explained everything I'd noticed before he woke up, and when we got to the part about the driver staring at us, my ex went quiet. Finally, he looked at me and said, "Babe, he had a gun pointed at us." I froze. I have no idea what that man had in mind that night. We hadn't upset anyone, hadn't spoken to anyone at the drive-in, so I don't think he followed us from there. Whoever you are, giant white truck guy, let's never meet again. Story 4. When I was about 20, I was on all kinds of dating apps because I had low self-esteem and a real desire for connection. One day I got a message on OkCupid from a guy we'll call Brent. Brent shared many of my interests, video games and other nerdy hobbies, and seemed nice enough, so I agreed to meet for a date. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him, and I assumed it was just because we lived in a fairly small city. The day of our date came, and I got ready, making sure I looked presentable but not overdressed, since he was taking me to Red Lobster. We were college students, so that didn't seem like such a bad choice for a first date. When he showed up, though, he looked noticeably unkempt compared to his photos. Not wanting to judge too quickly, I brushed it off and decided to give the date a chance. Then came strike number 2. When I ordered chicken, since I don't like seafood, he made a big public scene, frustrated that I wasn't eating seafood in a seafood restaurant. I tried to explain calmly, but the moment made everything awkward. I assumed he would feel equally put off and that we'd part ways quickly after dinner. How wrong I was. Instead, he walked me back to my car, suddenly acting affectionate and trying to maintain physical contact. He kept leaning in to kiss me, which I managed to avoid, and eventually I ended the evening with a series of very awkward goodbyes. As soon as I got home, I found dozens of texts waiting for me. I expected bitterness about the dinner, but instead it was an intense declaration of feelings. He went on about how perfect we were for each other and how he couldn't wait for another date. I ignored him, planning to talk to my roommate in the morning. I wasn't interested, but I felt bad blocking him outright. My roommate told me I should have, and she was right. Over the next few days, he texted me daily, insisting that we were statistically perfect for each other based on a quiz from the dating site. He said we were logistically ideal as a match. I tried gently telling him I wasn't interested, but he laughed it off, saying I would understand someday. During one of these conversations, he texted me that he was outside. A moment later, I heard knocking on my bedroom window. I panicked. When I asked what he was doing, he casually admitted he worked at my apartment complex as maintenance and janitorial staff. That's where I recognized him from. He told me he had always noticed me and that he knew from the beginning we would be together. The truth hit me. He hadn't started stalking me after our date. He already had been. I snapped and sent him a long, angry message with threats if he didn't leave me alone. He brushed it off, saying I was being silly and stubborn. He insisted it was inevitable that we'd be together, as if I were denying the law of gravity. His words were a mix of excessive affection and condescension. I blocked his number, but then he started coming to my window more often. Finally, I contacted my landlord. I didn't call the police because at the time I felt it wasn't bad enough. Thankfully, after my landlord confronted him, the visit slowed down. Soon after, I moved away. Nothing more ever came of it, and it has been over 10 years now. To my stalker date, let's not meet again. Story 5. I used to live in a 3-story house with my parents, younger sibling, and our dog. We had moved into the house a few months before my sibling was born, and that was when we first met the neighbors across the street. Their oldest child, Lucas, was always a bit strange, but some parts of his personality went beyond strange. They were genuinely disturbing. I am almost certain that Lucas was inside our house in the middle of the night. The house was built on a hill, so from the front it looked like 2 stories, but the basement connected to the backyard. The yards were large, making it easy for someone to sneak into our backyard unnoticed. My family was terrible about locking the basement doors at night. My sibling and I would go in and out while playing in the backyard, or someone would let the dog out, and the door would stay unlocked. It was common in our area for people to leave doors unlocked, but my parents always locked the door leading from the basement to the main level before bed. Back then, I had a messed up sleep schedule and was often awake at 3 or 4 in the morning. There are 2 late-night instances that make me think Lucas entered our home without us knowing. One night around 2:30 in the morning, I suddenly heard my dog growling. I thought he had spotted a cat outside, so I rushed downstairs to stop him from barking and waking everyone up. But instead of being at the front window, he was pressed against the locked door that led to the basement. The fur on his neck was raised, and he was growling at something on the other side of that door. I froze, realizing someone might be down there. I was just a young teenager, so I panicked and crept upstairs to wake my parents. They didn't take me seriously. My dad figured the dog had heard something outside, but he went down to check. He said everything looked normal, but admitted one of the basement doors had been left unlocked. Another time, much later at night, I heard my dog bark so loudly that it echoed through the whole house, startling me like a gunshot. I looked out my bedroom window, expecting to see a cat, but instead I saw Lucas running out of our yard in the dark. He bolted across the street and into his own house. My heart dropped and I quickly closed the curtains and hid, shaken by what I had just witnessed. I told my mom the next morning, and she said she would bring it up with Lucas's mom. Between those 2 incidents and other details I can't include, I am 99.9% sure Lucas was inside our house at night. This all happened years ago, and my family has long since moved away. The neighbors across the street are fine now, but looking back, I realize just how creepy and unsettling that situation truly was. Story 6. I am a 28-year-old woman living in a small subdivision that seems safe, though not the most aesthetically nice. My partner, who is 30 and works in law enforcement, is gone many nights during the week, so I am often home alone. A few months ago, we adopted a small dog, and since I work remotely, I take him on frequent walks throughout the neighborhood to give him exercise and to help with potty training. We have lived here for several years, but we never really walked around before, so we didn't know many of the neighbors. Now that I spend more time outside, I have started meeting more people. Most interactions are simple greetings, though a few neighbors are more talkative. Everyone seems harmless, except for one man I will call Bob, who was around 50. One afternoon, while I was out walking my dog, Bob was doing yard work and stopped me to compliment my dog. That quickly spiraled into a much longer encounter than I expected. What I thought would be a short 5-minute chat turned into a 90-minute conversation filled with strange, erratic stories. He told me about his time in the military, training bite dogs, being shot, and having fragments lodged near his heart. While some of it might have been true, much of what he said was clearly exaggerated and incoherent. He bragged about how wealthy and important his family was, even though he lived in a mobile home. He claimed to have every presidential cabinet on speed dial, to have been flown on secret government missions, and to have family members who got away with murder because it was covered up by authorities. He insisted that even Googling his name would bring agents to your door. Bob also said he had worked in construction and done masonry work for celebrities, and that he still hung out with many of them. He told me he spoke 7 languages, had a black belt, and wrestled alligators. In the middle of this bizarre monologue, he asked me to feel his muscles and even lifted his shirt to show me scars. His stories were rambling, inconsistent, and unsettling. At first, I dismissed him as someone unstable and lonely, but the conversation took a more disturbing turn. He suddenly asked if my old man was the cop who lived down the street, and I made the mistake of saying yes. He then claimed his son, who had gone to high school with my partner, didn't get along with him. He suggested it had something to do with my partner and his son's baby mama. For context, my partner and I have been together since high school. We were in a different grade than Bob's son, and neither of us has ever spoken to him or the mother of his child. The claim made no sense but was delivered in a way that felt accusatory and strange. Bob then started focusing on me personally. He commented on my hair. It is red, and red hair is often fetishized. Then asked me to take off my sunglasses so he could see my eyes. He kept saying I reminded him of an old neighbor he once had. And then even more disturbingly, he said I reminded him of his daughter, repeatedly calling me a pretty girl and comparing me to her by name. The comments left me deeply uncomfortable, but it got even worse. He shifted into talking about his history with women, bragging about how many he had been with, claiming he had been to court for over 50 paternity tests, and even suggesting he might be my father. There is absolutely no possibility of that. My parents have been married for 33 years, and I am not from this area. But the fact that he even brought it up left me feeling disgusted and unsafe. I am sure I am forgetting some of the more bizarre things he said because there were so many, but the overall experience was overwhelming. Eventually, I managed to cut the conversation short and head home. That was about 3 weeks ago. Since then, I have stopped taking my dog for walks in the neighborhood. Instead, I take him to a park or to a friend's house because I don't want to risk running into Bob again. But avoiding him hasn't stopped him from trying to reach me. He has come to my house and knocked on my door 3 separate times since that day. I have not answered any of them. The first 2 times my partner was not home, and the third time he was asleep after a night shift. I am honestly very unsettled and unsure what to do. My plan was to continue ignoring him, but I am worried that this might escalate or that I will run into him outside when I take my dog out, since I still have to let him into the yard. My mom thinks my partner should go confront Bob to set him straight, but I think that is a bad idea. Right now, I am just trying to avoid him completely, but I can't shake the feeling that this could turn into something worse. Story 7. I apologize for being vague, but I want to remove as many details as possible to keep my anonymity. This happened at night, so it was very dark. I had gone out to get my partner some soup and apples. She is pregnant and having trouble keeping food and liquids down. Before she asked for the apples, I had already taken 5 of the 2-milligram gummies I sometimes use for relaxation. It's legal where I live, and I hadn't planned on leaving the house that evening, so her request caught me off guard. Since I couldn't drive, I decided to walk. About halfway to the store, I noticed a vehicle driving slowly past me. It stopped at the stop sign at the end of the road. The car looked like an older blue or silver SUV, maybe from the early 2000s. I couldn't clearly see the emblem, but it might have been a Toyota RAV. It turned slowly and paused before heading onto a smaller highway, creeping along at around 25 to 35 kilometers per hour, then eventually drove off. I brushed it off and went into the store. I was inside for only 10 or 15 minutes before heading back. On my way home, I turned onto a small connector road leading into my neighborhood. That's when I saw what looked like the same vehicle again. It stopped after passing the stop sign at the main road into the neighborhood. I stopped walking, and the car inched forward, then stopped again. Then it started backing up. Alarm bells went off in my head. I quickly crossed the street and scrambled over a small hill to create distance. From that spot, I could see the driver. It was an older white man, maybe in his 40s or 50s, with gray scruff on his face, wearing glasses that looked almost like sunglasses and possibly a hat. He rolled down his window but said nothing. I froze, and when he still didn't speak, I took off running. I didn't hear the car behind me, so maybe he turned around. Shaken, I decided to ring the doorbell of a nearby house. A boy, maybe 13, answered, and I asked if his parents were home. I didn't want to scare him, but I told his mom I thought someone was following me. She called for her husband, and just then a car drove past. Panicked and emotional, I blurted out that it was the same car. But after a second look, I realized it wasn't. I corrected myself, but I had already lost their trust. The husband told me to leave. Embarrassed and apologetic, I ran off through their yard, still desperate to get home. At one point, I reached a spot where I could see headlights by an apartment complex. I suspected if someone was waiting, that would be a perfect spot. Lots of cars come and go there, day and night. I stayed out of sight until I heard movement again. Then I lay down behind a tree in a front yard and watched. Sure enough, the same SUV crawled past slowly, window down, tapping its brakes before continuing. I stayed hidden until it was out of sight, then bolted toward home. I fell again, dropping my phone, but grabbed it and ran the rest of the way. Thankfully, I made it back before the car could circle around. At least now, if that man was following me, he doesn't know where I live. Inside, I told my wife everything. The first time I saw that car, I knew something wasn't right. Other vehicles had passed by me during the walk, but this one felt different. Every instinct screamed that I was in danger. I grew up in a rough area and have been around plenty of strange people, but this set off alarms I couldn't ignore. I thought about calling the police but hesitated, worried they wouldn't believe me because I had taken the gummies. I also realized I was so panicked that I hadn't even thought to call them when the car first made me uneasy. Instead, I called my father-in-law and he told me to write everything down while it was fresh. That's what I'm doing now. If I see that car or man again, I will call the police immediately with this record. I hope I'm wrong and that I misunderstood, but I can't shake the anger and fear I feel about what happened. Story 8. A couple of days ago, I was driving home from work. To get to the main road I need, I have to pass through a large neighborhood that connects to a small downtown area. At the end, you can turn left, right, or go straight into another neighborhood. I usually turn left, which can take forever during rush hour. The intersection is also semi-busy with foot traffic because of the nearby bus stop and shops. That day, as I pulled up to the stop sign, I noticed a man approaching the crosswalk. From the very first glance, I knew he was trouble. The way he walked, slow, arrogant, like he didn't care that cars were waiting, immediately put me on edge. He looked disheveled, not in a manic way, more like someone who had worn the same outfit 10 times without washing it and gotten dressed in the dark. He didn't look sober either, though I couldn't tell if it was alcohol or something else. As he started crossing from my left, I was looking past him to check for cars so I could time my turn. But I could feel his eyes on me. I glanced quickly, and sure enough, he was staring directly at me. No expression, no blinking, just a hard, dark stare that carried intent. It was like I could see the thoughts running through his head, and none of them were good. The glance lasted maybe a second, but it felt like an eternity. I immediately looked away to the right to check traffic, then back to the left, and he was still locked on me. His body moved forward, but his eyes stayed glued to mine, like his head was on a swivel. Even though I was inside my car with the doors locked, I felt completely unsafe. By the time he finished crossing, I was still stuck waiting for traffic. Every second dragged on like forever. And even after he reached the other side, he didn't stop staring. He started walking backwards, just to keep his eyes on me. I finally managed to turn, but when I checked my rearview mirror, he was still walking backwards, still staring at my car. I must have made eye contact with him 3 or 4 times, each just a split second, but in my memory it replays in slow motion. There was something so bold and predatory about his stare, like he didn't care that I saw him, or that I knew what he was doing. He wanted me to know. It made me think that if this had happened in another setting, like if I had been walking alone at night instead of locked in my car, I would not have been safe. The image of his eyes keeps replaying in my head and it makes me feel sick. My boyfriend is out of town right now. And to make matters worse, there was a break-in just 5 blocks away from my house today. I feel uneasy and exhausted, but I can't sleep. Nights like these remind me how scary and draining it can be to be a woman. Constantly calculating risks, constantly aware that even a simple drive home can turn terrifying. I'm just grateful that this time, I had my locked car as a barrier and wasn't face-to-face with that man. Story 9. This all happened very recently. I'm a young woman who works late nights at a bar in the city, but lives in a rural area outside of town. On this night, it was slow, so we closed early, and one of the bouncers walked me to my car. At first, everything seemed normal, just the usual mix of cars on the main roads. I didn't notice anything suspicious until I turned onto one of the tiny back roads that lead toward my area. Hardly anyone ever takes that turn at the same time as me because it's not a populated route. But this car did, and as soon as we were on the winding, unlit road, they started acting strange. They flashed their brights at me, then rode so close to my bumper it felt like they were about to hit me, only to fall way back again. I tried adjusting my speed, slowing down, speeding up, but nothing made a difference. At the first intersection, they put their blinker on to turn right. I went straight but watched in my mirror as they angled the car as if they were turning, paused for several seconds, and then kept going straight after me. The same thing happened again. At the next intersection, I signaled left, waited until they signaled left too, and then at the last second, I turned right instead. Sure enough, they followed. At that point, I called the police. I told them I was heading toward the only open gas station nearby, the only place that would have people around at that hour since most everything else was closed. The dispatcher said they'd send officers to meet me there. I tried to drive steadily so I wouldn't arrive too quickly. When I finally reached the gas station, I pulled into the turn lane. The car behind me hesitated for a moment, then suddenly floored it, squealing around the corner and bolting away. In that split second, I caught a glimpse of the driver. They were alone, extremely pale, almost albino pale, with equally pale hair that might have been just slightly darker. Their face was androgynous, hard to place as male or female, and they stared at me for one chilling second before speeding off. The police didn't arrive until 20 minutes later. Typical. I sat there in my locked car, parked in front of the gas station, scanning the road for any sign of that vehicle. When the officers finally showed up, they told me there wasn't much they could do. My first thought was that maybe it was a customer from work, but we'd had so few people that night that I'm sure I would have recognized them. Besides, what would be the point of following me for a full hour only to suddenly make it so obvious? The whole thing left me shaken, confused, and very unsettled. Storytime. I'm a 21-year-old guy, 6 feet tall with a beard, and I look like a fairly big guy. I haven't been doing well mentally this past year, and I decided that today I needed to start making changes. My first step was something simple. I decided to go for a walk, something I hadn't done in years. I searched for nearby trails and found one along the river in a wooded area. When I pulled into the parking lot, there were maybe 5 cars parked there. One of them was a red Toyota with someone sitting inside. I parked, and as soon as I did, the Toyota pulled up right beside me. The guy inside, who looked about my age, just sat there staring at me. I tried to ignore him, staying in my car for about 5 minutes while I scrolled on my phone, looking for a podcast to listen to during my walk. Eventually, I got out and started walking down the trail. Almost immediately, the guy from the Toyota got out and began following me. I tried to stay calm, walking for maybe 2 minutes, but my gut was screaming at me that something was off. So I turned around. As I walked back, I passed right by him, making direct eye contact. The moment I did, he turned around too, now following me back toward the parking lot. That was it for me. I got to my car as quickly as I could, jumped in, and drove away fast. The strange part is, I'm a lot bigger than this guy, at least physically. I don't know how to fight, so I'm not confident in defending myself, but size-wise, I had the advantage. Still, the whole thing rattled me. It left me wondering what his plan was, and what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my gut. Story 11. When it came to getting my driver's license, I was a bit of a late bloomer. Living in the city made that manageable since public transport, walking, and rideshare apps were easy to access. I mostly relied on Uber for getting to work, and over time I became familiar with many of the local drivers. A few rides were mildly uncomfortable because of drivers being a little too friendly, but only one experience stands out as truly frightening. I was around 23, working an office job downtown, and I ordered an Uber to take me home after work. The driver was someone I didn't recognize. A man in his mid-30s, heavier set, smiley, and seemingly normal at first. He confirmed my address, and we started the drive. Right away, though, I noticed him continually glancing at me through the rearview mirror, more often than felt normal. Soon after, he told me that he had picked me up before. Considering how often I used Uber, that wasn't alarming on its own. But what followed was, he asked why I no longer worked at my former job. I hadn't worked there since I was 19, which meant he remembered me from 3 or 4 years earlier. That startled me. Then he went further, recalling details I had never willingly shared with Uber drivers. My hometown, my high school, my college, my major, even the fact that I had two younger sisters. He confirmed them all, like, "You're from X, right? You went to Z High School? You have two younger sisters? Still studying art history at Z University?" I was stunned. I'm not a chatty passenger and usually give vague answers. About 40 minutes south, or, yeah, I've got siblings. Never specifics. I couldn't understand how he knew all this. He went on to ask personal questions about my relationship status when I graduated, where I like to go out, and even about my male roommate. The way he phrased it made it clear he somehow already knew I lived with a man, and he pried inappropriately about our relationship. By then, I was extremely uncomfortable. I gave short, vague answers, sometimes pretending I hadn't heard him. He didn't take the hint, and he kept pressing until finally moving on to a different question. The entire 10-minute ride was him fishing for personal details and staring at me in the mirror. Toward the end, he started complimenting me, saying my name was pretty, calling me beautiful and smart, and telling me I was his favorite writer. He said he hoped we'd be matched again. As we approached my apartment, he asked which door was mine, so I wouldn't get wet. It wasn't raining, I lied and pointed out my landlord's door. He pulled up to my door anyway. Before unlocking the doors, he turned around, smiled, and said, "This is the longest ride we've taken together." Then he wished me a good night. I got out, walked around the side of the building, and waited for him to leave. Immediately afterward, I reported him to Uber. Back then, there were still human reps for customer service, and they told me they would block him from ever being matched with me again and review whether he would be allowed to drive at all. I avoided Uber for weeks and stuck to the bus. Thankfully, I never saw him again and never had another ride like that. But it still creeps me out to this day how he knew so much about me, things I had no memory of ever sharing. I'm grateful I've moved since then. Story 12. I don't usually share stuff like this, but I'm honestly freaking out and I need advice. I'm a 14-year-old boy, and something really strange has been happening for the past couple of nights. At first, I was too scared to tell anyone, but now I feel like I have to. It started 2 nights ago. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard this soft tapping noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a tree branch. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. It was definitely coming from my window. I live in a one-story house, so my window isn't very high up. But it's weird because outside my window, there's nothing but our backyard and a tall fence. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping kept going. Finally, I worked up the courage to get out of bed and peek through the blinds. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing outside, staring right at my window. He was tall with a pale face that looked almost empty, like there was nothing behind his eyes. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring. My whole body froze, and then I ducked down, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. After what felt like forever, I crawled back into bed and pulled the covers over my head. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a dream. But last night, it happened again. The same soft tapping, the same feeling that someone was outside. This time, I didn't even look. I just lay there frozen, praying he would go away. When I told my parents about it this morning, they didn't believe me. They said it was probably just nightmares and told me to stop watching scary movies before bed. But I know what I saw. Now I'm terrified about tonight. What if he comes back? What if he tries to get in? I've checked my window over and over to make sure it's locked, but I still don't feel safe. The thought of going to bed makes me panic. I don't know what to do, and the worst part is that nobody else believes me. Story 13. This just recently happened to me, a 19-year-old woman at my local Walmart. I was shopping alone in the late afternoon, picking up a few things. I grabbed a cart and headed toward the home and pharmacy section. When I stopped in the aisle with the protein bars, I parked my cart to the side while I looked for something specific. The store wasn't crowded and the aisle was empty until a man suddenly approached me from the side. I had never seen him before. He didn't have a cart or anything in his hands, and he was much taller than me. Immediately, I kept my distance and stayed on guard since I was alone. He said something I didn't catch, so I asked him to repeat himself. This time he asked if I was from a township about 45 minutes away. That set off alarms in my head. I told him no and tried to walk away. Then he said, "You are very pretty." I gave an awkward smile and moved to leave again, clearly uninterested. But he pressed on and asked if I was single. I cut him off with a blunt, "Not interested," and walked away quickly. The whole encounter felt off. He didn't seem outwardly threatening, but the fact that he targeted me while I was alone, claimed I looked familiar, even though he came from the side, and tried to push for personal information, made me uncomfortable. Afterward, I rushed to checkout, scanning the store to see if he was nearby. Luckily, I saw him walking in the opposite direction. I paid, hurried to my car, and made sure no one was around before leaving. Maybe he was harmless, but my instincts and his body language screamed red flag. Story 14. I'm a 22-year-old woman living in a small city, and for the past month I've been repeatedly approached by a man who looks to be at least in his 50s. The first time was at a bus stop at night. He said he had seen me around for a while, and that he and a bus driver had placed a bet about where I was originally from. I kept my replies short, but he didn't take the hint. On the bus, he sat next to me and asked endless personal questions. My name, age, where I lived, where I worked. I lied about my name and job. What disturbed me most was when he mentioned how I always keep to myself, looking straight ahead, and even noted how I sometimes get off earlier stops at night to walk home. I've only done that a couple of times, yet somehow he noticed. Since then, I've seen him multiple times despite changing my routine. He has asked me to come to his usual pub and for my Facebook, which I refused, saying I didn't have one. When he calls out the fake name I gave him, I ignore him and wear AirPods to avoid contact, but he persists. Today it escalated. He asked for my number. It was late, the bus stop was dimly lit, and not many people were around. Out of fear, I gave him my number. As I left, he kissed my hand goodbye. Even recalling it makes me feel sick. About an hour later, he texted me, "Hey, beautiful, it's his name, X." I have no intention of replying, but I know I will likely keep running into him. A nearby couple overheard our conversation and checked on me afterward. I thanked them, and I was so grateful. For now, I've only told my younger sister. I haven't told my parents because they are already very paranoid and controlling, and I don't want to make them more worried. I'm saving up to move to another city and live on my own, but for now, I'm still at home with them. I've tried everything, changing my schedule, taking earlier buses, even wearing an engagement ring again, though that hasn't helped much in the past. Still, this man won't stop. It feels unbearable, like I'm being watched all the time. I don't know what else to do. Story 15. I'm a young woman, and I went out for a run on a popular trail. Normally, I feel safe running there, even though it's somewhat secluded because there are usually a lot of people around. But on this particular day, a town event had pulled most people away, so the trail was much quieter. I parked my car, and as I was getting out, I heard really loud, intense music coming from somewhere in the lot. I glanced over and saw a man sitting in a white pickup truck. His engine was running, the music was blasting, and he was staring at me through his side mirror. As soon as I noticed him, he put his truck in drive and pulled out of the lot. It creeped me out a little, but I told myself maybe he had just finished his own run and was listening to pump-up music. I brushed it off and walked toward the trail entrance. Before starting, I realized my shoe was untied. I bent down behind a bush to fix it, which put me out of sight of the parking lot. That's when I saw the same truck drive back down the road, make a U-turn, and return to the lot. This time, the music was off. He parked again, right across from my car, and just sat there. If I hadn't stopped to tie my shoe, I might not have even noticed he had returned. Immediately, my body went into fight-or-flight mode. I didn't feel safe enough to head back to my car, but I was too scared to start running down the trail with him, sitting there watching. I hid behind the bush for about 10 minutes, heart pounding, until another hiker appeared coming down the trail. I quickly explained what was happening and asked if he would walk me back to my car. Thankfully, he was incredibly kind and agreed. As we approached, the man in the truck actually got out of his vehicle but froze when he saw I wasn't alone. I don't think he noticed the hiker at first. I got into my car as quickly as I could and drove off, while the hiker headed back to continue his walk. I was shaken by the whole thing. Part of me wonders if I was just being paranoid, but I can't explain his actions. Why drive away as soon as I got there, only to circle back, turn off the music, park across from my car, and sit there for 10 minutes? Something about it didn't feel right at all. Story 16. Back in 2018, I traveled alone to Seoul for a week. Since I was still a student at the time, studying abroad in Kyoto, and Seoul is expensive, I booked a bed in a hostel. It was supposed to be a mixed dorm for 6 people. When I arrived, I realized I would be sharing the room with 5 men who were already staying there. One Japanese, one Korean, 2 Chinese, and one German. From the start, the German guy made me uncomfortable. He stared at me a lot, though I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was fine since I planned to be out exploring most of the day anyway, and the hostel was fully booked, so changing rooms wasn't an option. Still, every day he asked if I wanted to hang out and see the city with him. I preferred exploring on my own, so I kept making excuses. Once I gave in and agreed to go with him to Gangnam, but it was painfully awkward. We had almost nothing to talk about besides small talk. Things got worse when I realized he lingered whenever I was getting ready in the mornings. As I applied makeup or fixed my hair, he would just stand there silently watching me. I asked him several times if he had somewhere else to be, but he just shrugged. It unsettled me, but I kept trying to avoid him. One day I even ran into him at a cafe in the city center, which felt like too much of a coincidence. By contrast, the other guys in the dorm were kind and respectful. We even all went out to dinner together once. On my last day, something happened that I'll never forget. I had woken up early but drifted back to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was to him sitting by my bed, caressing my arm and shoulder. Shock hit me like ice. Even though he was only touching my arm, I felt sick with disgust. I always thought I'd react fiercely in a situation like that. Scream, curse, shove. But I was so stunned that I just sat up and demanded to know what he was doing. He responded by confessing his love for me. He insisted that I was special, that he knew it after only a week, and that he wanted to see me again back home since we were both from Germany. I told him it wasn't possible and that he couldn't be in love with me after such a short time. He kept insisting he just knew and wanted to show me his affection. Hearing him say that while remembering his hand on me made my skin crawl. He left later that morning and offered to go to the airport together, but I refused and said I'd take a later bus. Thankfully, he didn't push. I was just relieved to see him go. I didn't run into him at the airport, but once I was on my own, I broke down crying. The whole week had been exhausting, constantly deflecting his advances, pretending to be polite, and then ending it with him touching me in my sleep. I don't know how I managed to stay calm and measured instead of lashing out, but part of me feared how he might have reacted if I had been aggressive. Looking back, I regret not insisting on switching rooms, but at the time, nothing serious had happened yet, and I kept telling myself maybe he was just socially awkward. That final morning proved my instincts were right all along. Since then, I've never doubted them again. Story 17. This happened just a few hours ago at around 2 a.m. I live in an apartment complex downtown that houses a lot of university students, but the top floor penthouses are mostly rented by non-students. For background, I'm one of 3 resident advisors/managers for the student residents. Each night, one of us is on call with a central duty phone to handle issues. At around 2:20 a.m., I woke up to what I can only describe as someone trying to break into my apartment. It wasn't normal knocking. It was pounding, kicking, and body slamming the door, mixed with repeated attempts to use my keypad. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man who seemed intoxicated. I was terrified that if he realized I was inside, things would escalate, so I stayed silent. I grabbed a kitchen knife for reassurance and called the on-call RA, but no one picked up. I called the area duty supervisor, who answered but wasn't sure what to do. She said maybe I'd have to call the police, then promised to call around and get back to me. I didn't call the police immediately because in the past, whenever I've called them here, I've had to go downstairs and badge them into the building. The thought of unlocking my door and stepping out with someone trying to force their way in made me freeze. Instead, I started calling everyone I knew in the building, friends, other RAs, my supervisor, but no one answered. Finally, area duty called me back to say the higher-ups wanted an extra set of eyes on the situation, but since she didn't have a car, she needed to call an Uber to get over to my place. By now, nearly 40 minutes had passed. At around 2:52 a.m., the pounding stopped. I checked the peephole again and saw one of my residents talking to the man. After a few minutes, they left toward the elevator. I stepped out to talk to my resident, who said he thought the pounding was at his own door until he realized it was mine. He told me the guy was trying to get into his girlfriend's apartment, but didn't have his phone, and the code she gave him wasn't working. The girlfriend, it turned out, lived directly one floor above me. My resident had kindly lent him a phone to call her. He gave me his number in case anything like this happened again. I checked my door and found the bottom corner had been kicked in badly. The hinge is almost broken. The deadbolt was the only thing that kept him out. The RA on duty finally arrived at 3 a.m. after area duty arranged her ride. We went upstairs to confront the guy with his girlfriend. She opened the door looking annoyed, clearly not wanting us to wake him, but after showing her photos of my door, she seemed upset and tried to rouse him. When he finally came out, he apologized but claimed he had only knocked softly. He even demonstrated, which was nothing like what I had experienced. He denied causing damage and mostly spoke to the other RA instead of me. His girlfriend looked disappointed and he snapped at her saying, "Well, what was I supposed to do? I didn't have my phone and you didn't pick up earlier." They had apparently just moved in on Sunday and he claimed he forgot which room was theirs. We asked for his ID and took a picture of it. Then I filed a maintenance request, emailed my boss and the leasing manager, and called the police. The officers arrived, I let them in, showed them the damage, and explained what had happened. They said it was probably an honest mistake and gave me a case number so the leasing manager could handle billing for repairs. They went upstairs to talk to the couple, but refused to give me an update afterward, saying it wasn't necessary. The whole thing was terrifying. For 40 minutes, I sat inside thinking someone was going to break through and kill me. My door is barely hanging on, and I'm waiting for maintenance to fix it. I'm also trying to prepare for my MCAT tomorrow, and I can't stop replaying what happened. Looking back, I'm especially worried for the girlfriend upstairs. Even for someone intoxicated, his behavior wasn't normal. I'll be paying close attention to noises from above and won't hesitate to call if I ever hear anything that sounds like domestic violence. This has me badly shaken, but I'm grateful I made it through. Story 18. I debated about posting this because I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, but I decided to share and see what others think. A couple of strange things have happened at my house recently, and yesterday it escalated to something that has me shaken. Our house has a basement crawl space that can only be accessed from outside, through a door directly beneath my bedroom window, and about 10 feet from the steps up to the back deck. It's a fairly large space, concrete walls, dirt floor, tall enough for a grown man to stand in. Until recently, it was half full of junk from a kitchen renovation. It had a padlock, but after we had our yard guy clear it out completely, we didn't bother locking it again. We figured there was no point since it was empty. We just kept the rusty sliding bolt latched. A couple of weeks ago, my boyfriend noticed the crawl space door wide open while taking out recycling. It couldn't have come open on its own. That bolt takes effort to move. He checked it. No one inside, still empty. He assumed someone snooped around, found nothing, and left. He warned me to keep doors locked when he's not home. A few days later, I was outside with our dog when he ran straight to that door, sniffing and scratching. It was ajar again. I looked inside, empty. We live in a wooded area with plenty of wildlife. Raccoons, squirrels, groundhogs, and I'm used to hearing critters scurrying on the roof, especially around the big oak tree near our bedroom. So when I was lying in bed reading yesterday afternoon and heard pattering on the roof, I thought nothing of it. But my dog was acting strange, restless, pacing. Then I heard the unmistakable creak of the crawl space door opening, directly below my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw a man emerging from the crawl space and heading up the steps to our back deck. My stomach dropped. I only saw him from behind. He wore a ball cap, and that was all I could make out. I dropped the blinds, ran down the hall toward the door he was approaching, and at the same moment my dog exploded with barking. When I reached the door, the man was gone. I think the dog scared him off, but I can't shake how wrong it felt. Why would someone come out of the crawl space and head for my back door in broad daylight, knowing someone was obviously home, unless they meant more than just knocking? And no one ever knocks at that door. Everyone uses the front. A few minutes later, I grabbed my pepper spray and went out to check. The crawl space door was wide open, no one inside. When my boyfriend got home, he was furious I went down there alone. He put the padlock back on the door immediately and took my old gun out of the safe, insisting I keep it under the mattress. I only agreed after he loaded it with rat shot because I don't think I could bring myself to shoot someone, even in self-defense. But the noise alone might scare an intruder off. I keep asking myself if I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe the man I saw wasn't the same person who'd been opening the crawl space. But I know what I heard. The door creaking open right before I saw him on the steps. With the lock back on, at least if someone was slipping in and out before, that stops now. For now, I'm keeping the doors locked, trying to stay more angry than scared. But I can't shake the image of him walking out of that crawl space and toward my house. Story 19. I recently moved into a decent-sized two-bedroom house with a full basement, where most of my family's old and not-so-important belongings are still stored in boxes, waiting to be sorted. The neighborhood is usually quiet, though our elderly neighbors warned us about sketchy figures wandering around at night. They said a section of the neighborhood, a couple of blocks away, is home to people who have no place to go. About 2 weeks ago, I went down to the basement to sift through some items and noticed that a few random things on the tables, our toolkit, binders, even some family pictures, had been opened and scattered around carelessly. I assumed another family member had been down there sorting and didn't think much of it, so I cleaned up and kept working. Over the next week, though, I started hearing strange banging noises from the basement, like the sound of a washing machine lid slamming shut. At first, I tried to dismiss it, but since I was the only one home at the time, my nerves got the better of me. I grabbed my pepper spray and went downstairs to check. The basement is large, with 2 main rooms and 2 smaller adjoining rooms. One of the smaller rooms has a door I've never opened, barred by a beam, though it stands slightly ajar. I always assumed it was just an extra storage area. I turned on all the lights and cautiously looked around. A few more boxes and belongings had been opened and left scattered across the floor. That wasn't the worst part. The basement door that leads outside to the side yard was unlocked, something my family never forgets to secure. My stomach dropped at the thought that someone might have come in through there. I searched the entire basement but didn't find anyone, though I didn't dare touch the barred door. When I told my father, he brushed it off, saying the noises were probably just the heater popping, and that maybe he accidentally left the side door unlocked after taking out the trash. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on, that maybe someone had discovered our basement as an easy way in and had been rummaging through our belongings. Nothing else has happened since then, aside from occasionally hearing people shouting while walking the streets at night, but it still makes me uneasy. Now I double-check every lock in the house before bed, and I'm waiting for a free day so my dad can finally open that barred basement door. Until then, I can't help but wonder what, if anything, might be on the other side. Story 20. Back when I lived in Virginia, we had a neighbor who at first glance seemed like the perfect helpful guy. He was always outside lending a hand, fixing cars, helping with landscaping, running tools over to whoever needed them. Most of the neighbors liked him because he was reliable and seemed genuinely eager to help. But for me, there was always something that didn't sit right. His friendliness felt a little too rehearsed, his smile never really reached his eyes, and deep down he just gave me an uneasy feeling. That feeling grew stronger the day I saw something I'll never forget. I was walking by and noticed him in his driveway, smacking something over and over. At first I thought he was breaking up wood or working on a project, but as I got closer, I realized it was a cat. He told me very casually that it was rabid, and he was taking care of it. The way he said it, without any emotion, made my stomach turn. I reported it, but nothing ever came of it. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of how cold he had seemed. About 2 months later, his girlfriend suddenly went missing. The entire neighborhood was shocked, and he played the part of the devastated partner. He held his head in his hands, paced around like he was in pieces, and neighbors gathered around to comfort him. But one moment stood out. When he turned slightly away from the crowd, I caught the faintest grin on his face. It was quick, but it was there, and it chilled me to my core. Not long after, the truth came out. His girlfriend's body was discovered in a shallow grave near Virginia Beach. She had multiple broken bones and her skull had been crushed. The brutality of it was horrifying. He was quickly identified as the prime suspect and arrested. What haunts me most is that during his arrest, he was grinning. His eyes were empty, cold, and that grin stretched across his face like he was proud of what he had done.